Welcome to the Reinvent Relevance podcast. I'm your host, Jason Mutzfeld, Director of Learning at Merfeld Career Management. Our show is about what we do to help people who want to take charge of their careers. We call it Reinventing Relevance, embracing change to do the work worth doing. Now, when you're leaving a job or pivoting into a new job, there's a certain amount of legal paperwork that has to go on. You probably will never see it, but you just might. So knowing some of those pitfalls is important. Joining me today on the show is Adam Bartrom. He is an attorney, and he's going to go over some of the pitfalls that you may encounter on your career journey. Now, let me disclaim right up front, this is not legal advice. If you have need of legal advice, consult an attorney. An attorney is a good person to have in your corner. And remember, attorney is the one working for you. The lawyer works for the other guy. Adam, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All righty. So let's just start off here. What are some of the common legal issues that a person might come across when they're conducting a job search, especially if they're still employed? There's a kind of a gray area when you're looking to leave, you're looking to pull the ripcord and see what color your parachute is. What should you be aware of that you might not be aware of?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing that, people with 1 foot in and 1 foot out looking for greener pastures in a new job is make sure you don't have a non-compete. That is one thing. If you're going to bounce around in the same space, that may prohibit you from doing that. So, and sometimes you sign it 10, 12 years ago and you forget about it. So I think you got to make sure, one, do you have a non-compete? And then two, if you do, you got to go get it looked at, because you got to know some are enforceable, some aren't. It's very fact specific. So, going to talk to, the attorney, to a specialist, to somebody, and that's what I would say too. Don't just go to a general practitioner. Go to somebody who knows what they're talking about, because the rules on non-compete are state by state and they're constantly changing. So you need to talk to an expert.
Gotcha. Okay. And what if you were privy to confidential company information? How do you protect yourself in that situation if your boss decides to come at you and say, whoa, wait a minute, you have privileged information in your brain or on your smartphone? What are some things that might come into play there?
It's a great question. So, and a lot of times it happens innocently. Maybe you forward something to your Gmail because you're going to work from home that weekend. You put it on a USB drive. You transfer it to your home computer, and maybe you forget about it. But if you do have confidential information belonging to the company, that is company property. So, I would advise people, even though this isn't legal advice, right? Do an audit. Make sure you go through, you check your Gmail, you check your computer, you check your thumb drives, because, certainly you can't steal things, but you also don't want to, by accident be in possession of some of these things, because all the same, it can still result in a legal claim against you.
Gotcha. Now what about things like contacts and any sort of things that are obviously not privileged information? Are you safe to take your contact list with you? I know in sales, this is your contact list is worth your weight in gold, and it can still get you in trouble, I'm sure. Well, what about contacts?
Yeah, so contacts, that's a tricky one, and that's going to be a case-by-case basis. There is an argument that if you've amassed your contacts by being a face-forward person for the company, then that list could be the company's property. I would say err on the side of caution, work with your HR department, figure out, what you can take, what you can't. You're entitled to take your family pictures back, or some personal tax documents you may have, but that contact list is a gray area. So I would, you want to err on the side of caution, and the reason is these lawsuits, whether they be non-compete or trade secret, they are incredibly expensive. They move very fast, and it's not uncommon for an individual to incur $20,000 or $30,000 of legal fees in the first 45 days of one of these lawsuits.
Ooh. Yeah, that would definitely be a rocky start to any new job.
Right.
So how can you go about protecting yourself? Let's say you've reached the point where you're like, I've had enough. I've got my new job lined up, or whatever you're going on to. My next thing, I'm ready to go to that. how do you protect yourself when you leave a job, when you approach your boss and say, look, I'm out?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's always good to end on good terms. You want to end amicably. In addition to what we've talked about already, make sure you don't have a non-compete. Make sure you've returned all company property. There's nothing good that happens from flaming your former employer on the way out the door or to third parties, because that very easily
Yeah.
can become a defamation lawsuit.
Yeah.
The other thing too is if you have a non-compete, you'd be well served to share that fact with your new employer. There are situations where an employee goes from company A, goes to company B, doesn't tell company B about the non-compete. All of a sudden they get hit with a cease and desist letter. And sometimes the company B will just let that employee go because they're going to see that as dishonesty by omission. I think you want to be pretty open on your way out with your former company, and you want to be pretty open with your new employer as well, so that nothing's being hidden.
And heaven help you if you've had to sign a non-compete and forgot about it.
Correct.
Because you're still liable and on the hook for that. So don't let
Assuming
that.
it's enforceable, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I actually ran into this recently, not personally, but the physician that I go to, we go through a subscription-based direct PPO model for direct care. And he's told stories about doctors who get in with hospitals and then are stuck with non-competes, and they can't practice medicine anymore if they want to leave. So yeah, it's definitely something to take into consideration. Let's go on to the interview process, because this one is a little bit also tricky, because people who are doing interviews aren't necessarily trained by HR or trained in business school to do interviews and do them well. And they might ask questions that are really wrong. They're questions you can't ask in interviews. And I know this and you know this, but some people don't know that, especially the person giving an interview. What are some of the questions that an employer can't ask during an interview? Could you give some advice on that?
Sure. So, I mean, there's generally protected characteristics by law. So, for instance, you can't discriminate against someone based upon race or gender or religion, disability, medical condition, pregnancy, all those things. So because you can't discriminate against someone based upon those protected characteristics under the law, interviewers really shouldn't be asking questions about that, because all that does is raise a doubt of, if I have a disability and the interviewer are asking me questions about that disability, and all of a sudden I don't get the job. Now I'm left with the impression that I didn't get that job because of my disability or any other protected class. So, pretty standard advice that I give to my corporate clients is stay the heck away from all those issues. And, this I think goes both ways, both for employers and employees. Be careful what's out there on social media. Employers may stumble across this information that they would otherwise avoid in an interview by looking on social media. And, if you're out there searching for a job, you should really give your social media a scrub and make sure there's nothing out there that's incendiary or, offensive or anything like that. Keep it right in the middle of the fairway, because that could be the difference between getting a job and not getting a job.
That's so true. Yeah, we always tell clients on their LinkedIn profile, never put your high school or your college graduation dates unless it was relatively recent, because you can be identified. You can guess your age. If you say, well, I'm from the class of 1988. Oh, well, okay, you're 50 years old, and I don't want to hire somebody who's 50, whether intentionally or unintentionally. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, an element of being savvy on social media, both your personal stuff and your professional stuff.
Yeah, people never think about social media, but that's a good point to bring up. Now that brings up a secondary question. What if you do put that out there? Say you are a ordained minister at such and such house of worship, and you put that on your resume. Is that still a forbidden topic, or can the interviewer bring it up?
I think if it's part of your employment history, you're a little safer to explore that. Now, I'm not sure, outside of I'm not sure what an interview would gain by asking those questions too, unless it was, why are you leaving this employment and going to this? But there's certainly no reason for the interview to be probing religious beliefs in the course of an interview.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Now, before you sign any sort of contract, they always say you should read it. That's a weird idea, isn't it? What is some advice you would give somebody if they're signing up for a company and they have to sign an employment contract? Generally speaking, those can be something pretty straightforward, which is we will pay you this amount of money. What do you need to know before you put your name on that dotted line at the bottom of the document? What are some things to consider?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, first of all, obviously you need to read it and be comfortable with it. And I would tell you, if it's got non-compete, non-solicit, or any other kind of legalese in there that you don't feel comfortable with, go talk to a lawyer. Go talk to a lawyer that specializes in this, because a non-compete agreement, for instance, prohibits you from competing within a certain scope of employment, within a certain geographic territory, within a certain amount of time. That's different than a customer non-solicit that basically says, hey, you can't touch any of the customers that regardless of your physical location, you can't touch any of those customers. And there's also the employee non-solicit, which I call the Jerry Maguire clause, about who's coming with me. We're basically saying you can't go raid your former coworkers as well. So,
gotcha.
If you're going to sign something, you really need to understand the metes and bounds of what you're able to do. That way you can weigh the risk reward on that as well. One other thing, anybody, this goes beyond employment, but looking at any contract does it have an attorney's fees provision in there? Basically saying that if you violate that agreement, can the other side come after you for their attorney's fees that they incurred? That's a pretty common provision, and that can make it very expensive. So, if we're looking for things that should grab your attention, and if you never violate your agreement, you have nothing to worry about. But these are certainly things that you at least want to know what you can do and can't do before you sign on the dotted line.
Gotcha. And I assume that same goes for any sort of separation agreements. And that's somewhat common when somebody's been terminated, please sign this document so you can't this, that, or the other. Any advice there, or pretty much just the same thing? Read it and make sure that you've talked to an attorney if you need to.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. If you're signing an agreement on the way out, there's a trade-off. You're presumably getting money in exchange for waiving some rights that you have. So you just, in a lot of cases, people still sign them because the money's worth it, particularly maybe in a certain situation. But, you just want to go into these things with your eyes wide open. So just understand what you're getting and what you're giving in that situation.
Gotcha. Okay. And recently I was discussing this upcoming topic with a friend, and he said, well, I heard non-competes aren't enforceable. Enforceable, especially when you and I are both in the state of Indiana, and they quote unquote aren't enforceable. Can you speak to that a little bit? Just because, again, we're discussing it. How did that idea ever come?
I have no idea how that idea came out, but it's a very dangerous one because they absolutely are enforceable. I just wrote a Fort Wayne Business Weekly column for this month, on the enforceability of non-competes. And the reality is some are enforceable and some aren't. But again, circling back to these, if they are enforceable and you're violating it, more times than not, you're going to get sued for it. And those are incredibly expensive lawsuits. You got to keep in mind too, most individuals aren't on equal economic footing with a company. The company's going to have the deep pockets and the ability to go after former employees if they believe they're violating it. And most individuals don't have, 50, 60 grand just laying around to burn on attorney's fees. So I would say that is if you hear somebody say, non-competes are unenforceable, it's about the same as them saying the earth is flat. There's some skepticism there.
Good point. So, and if you have an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, you're forced to sign one. How do you honor that as you go into a new employer? Are there things to consider there as well?
No, there absolutely are. And this is kind of a common theme that we've been talking through, but you got to understand with that NDA, maybe you worked in an R&D job or something and you were privy to highly proprietary information. You got to understand what that NDA allows you to do and what it doesn't allow you to do. And, you don't want to come anywhere close to that line on getting into prohibited activity because, I've numerous lawsuits right now where people have violated either trade secrets or confidentiality or non-competes, and they become highly emotional cases because the company feels very spurned that they paid this employee, a salary and they made promises and then they aren't following them. And it usually results in economic damage to the former company too, because they're losing out on the value of their proprietary information or sales or anything like that. So they're highly emotional cases on both sides.
And I've known a lot of companies that when they pay for development of an employee, say through a certification or a licensure or even a degree, they will sometimes say, you need to work for this amount of period of time to protect their investment. And that's fair as well too. That's not out of the realm of possibility, is it?
No, usually that's done in a reimbursement policy, essentially saying, hey, the company's going to pay for you to get this certification or take this class or even get this degree. And they'll pay for it so long as you agree to stay employed for, a certain amount of time, 2, 3, 4 years. That's a pretty common device.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Well, we always want to know a little bit about how careers work and how careers involved. And you're our first attorney, Adam. So tell us a little about the legal profession. We're gonna switch gears here. Tell us what drew you to the law, and how is that working out for you? Tell us a little about your career journey.
Sure. So I no lawyers in my family. So first lawyer. I think my parents, would tell me as a teenager, I very much enjoyed arguing, probably for the sake of arguing. But when you're a teenager, you know everything, so you're always right? So
True.
Always kind of was interested in it through high school and college. So took the leap and went to Notre Dame for law school, and I've ended up at Barnes and Thornburg. That's the only firm I've ever worked for. And it's been fun to grow with them. Yeah. I've been there almost 14 years now. When we started, we had 6 offices, and we've got about 18 across the country, coast to coast now.
It's a big firm.
Big firm. But, even working in the Fort Wayne office, though, we've got about 20 lawyers. So you've got a small kind of family feel, but the resources of a large firm as well. And it's been a very good dynamic for us. And,
Great.
I ended up in labor and employment, and what really happened was in my 3rd year of law school, my labor professor walked in on the very first day and said, she wrote the 7 words that you can't say from George Carlin on TV on the chalkboard.
And she said, I know those words well.
She said, if you get into labor, you're going to get to say these all the time at work. And I was hooked.
That's awesome.
So I immediately got into the labor and employment department at B&T. I've been there the entire time. I probably do half kind of day-to-day employment counseling, or litigation, stuff like discrimination lawsuits or non-competes. And then the other half are traditional labor. So dealing with unions, collective, union negotiations, that sort of thing. This is kind of how my plate gets filled out. And as you can see, we're in month 4 of working from home right now, and really our office is slowly reopened, so like I think most have. So I think this view right here is the view I'm going to have for at least the next few months, and it's credit to technology that you can. I was discussing this with a colleague the other day. I think with an internet connection and a phone, I could do this job from pretty much anywhere. So that's been helpful in this particular situation.
Yep, and that is the future of work, is the work from home. If you can do it, it is definitely a benefit. So, well, Adam, I appreciate your time today. It's been a wealth of information has been shared here, and hopefully our audience took something away from it. And if they will look you up online and reach out to you if they have questions. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for joining us. We if you want to find out more about how you can take your career to the next level, please feel free to visit our website, Check us out on LinkedIn. Connect with us. We love to meet new people. We hope you all have a great week. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.